All right, you're looking good.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. So, Professor Z, I'm glad to be interviewing you. Had a lovely class last semester.
Good, good.
So the first question I want to ask you is, can you describe your role as a professor in the geology department at NOVA and what key responsibilities you have?
Sure. Well, there is officially no geology department, so I'm within the Math Sciences and Technology department. Within that, we have sub-disciplines. In the physical and life sciences, those are mostly physics, chemistry, biology, and geology. And each of those is represented by faculty. Among those disciplines, geology right now is probably the smallest. I'm the sole full-time geology professor. Most of the campuses have one or two geology professors. I think most have one. Loudon has two, and Woodbridge didn't have any. Maybe they have one now, but there's no more than, usually it's about one per campus. What is my role? Was that the question? What was the role?
Yeah,
responsibilities.
Your key responsibilities.
It can change through time, and it has changed through time. My primary responsibility is basically running the geology classes. We offer physical geology, historical geology, oceanography, and a few other courses come and go here and there. But those are the primary responsibilities. Depending on sort of the administrative hierarchy or administrative scheduling, I have had various administrative roles. That can include scheduling classes, curriculum development, what topics to face, any new courses that we have to teach that may be coming up, old courses that need to be removed, sort of keeping an active group of adjuncts going, making sure that we can fill all of the needs for the students. And to a certain extent, it's also oversight of lab and lab facilities, lab personnel. Like I said, those responsibilities wax and wane depending on, every now and then they change the administrative hierarchy. I used to have a lot more responsibility for that. That's since been diminished, but now a little bit of it's starting to come back. So that's it.
Okay. And how important would you say communication is in your role? And could you give some examples of how it plays a part in the classroom with students or with colleagues and other professors?
Well, communication, is vital in all teaching roles. And I think in there you asked about sort of in the classroom among colleagues and among professionals. I'll first focus on in the classroom. Teaching is communication. And if I'm not communicating, then I'm not teaching. So, it's pretty basic. So in that respect, yes, I have to make sure that I am communicating. Now, it's communicating technical information, which is why they're taking the course, but it's also communicating the rules of the class, my policies, my grading policies. If I don't communicate those properly, then I get in trouble. And students have expectations of what they're going to learn, but how they're going to learn it, and what they're responsible for. So that all gets into communications. So without getting into too much detail, yes, communication is something I'm constantly focusing on and reassessing to make sure it's working. Colleagues and administration as far as the college, yes, it's important. And when communications break down among colleagues or among the administration, we have problems. And we've run into some problems recently because they think that the communication lines are not open between faculty and administration. Whether that's true or not, that's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out resolutions to that. But yes, we need all voices to be heard. That is administrations on all campuses tend to balloon after a while. But, you know, we could remove the administrators from this and probably still keep teaching classes. But we can't remove the teachers and still keep teaching classes. People aren't going to sign up for classes if it's just administrators at the school.
Right.
So, you know, you gotta make sure you know your priorities. So.
And I want to ask you, how do you make sure that complex concepts in geology are effectively communicated to students with different levels of understanding and different levels of knowledge coming into the class?
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect question for community college. Unlike a lot of other elite institutions, where you know they have much more of a vetting process getting into the college, and I've taught and gone to some fairly elite colleges, and I've gone to state institutions and worked and taught and learned there. I've gone to private colleges, some of which were fairly elite, and I have to admit that it surprised me when I got to some of the more elite colleges that the level of students actually was apparent, because they have such a vetting process getting into the college that the students who come in all have accomplishments behind them and are mostly self-motivated, and I can teach and present things at a much, I wouldn't say a higher level, but a faster level. At community colleges, the vetting isn't nearly as thorough, but that's by design. That's because we're meant to be community accessible, and that's more important than making sure you have the best from the community. It's that you have all of the community, and because of that, I have to realize that the students in the class come in at all different levels, sometimes vastly different, and some of the students are going to be very rapid and elite learners, whereas others are going to be struggling and may not make it through the class. And the balance is always making sure that you can present the material so it's accessible to all without boring anyone or leaving anyone behind. How do you do that? It's, you know, that's something that I'm constantly reassessing every semester. And how do I make sure it's getting through? That's the role of exams. You know, that's the role of interpersonal communications. And as sort of a corollary on this, I mean, for me, this is something that I'm constantly struggling with. I think that's part of the job. It's much easier for me to tell if somebody is getting it if I'm in an in-person class as opposed to an online class. Not even an asynchronous, but just as a live Zoom. The interactions, and I've seen this in grades, I've seen this teaching both of these, that my interactions with students are much more organic and much more thorough when I'm meeting them in person than when I'm just seeing them on a Zoom screen. And I'm assuming that it's the same way for students.
Definitely, yeah, I would say it definitely is.
Yeah. And I think students are starting to realize this too. I mean, we're pretty much at the whim of students. If students sign up for online classes at the expense of in-person, we teach online classes and we don't teach in-person classes. Do we think that that's the best way? No. But we have to accommodate the demand. And as much as we tell students, sign up for the in-person ones. And I think there's a delay by several years, but I'm starting to see students realize that also.
Yeah.
And there's some students will only sign up for in-person classes. And I think that's a smart choice.
I think that's definitely true, especially with a lot of students who got really comfortable with the online classes due to, you know, the beginning of the pandemic and stuff.
Yep. Oh, it's very convenient.
It's very convenient, and it's almost like an addiction because you're like, well, I can't do it without it, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and across the board, from my side, I saw grades. People generally do better, and this is a generality, but people generally do better in person than they do online. We normally see a bimodal distribution in community colleges, there's one group of people getting in the 70s and the 80s, and there's another group getting in the 40s and the 50s. When we started the pandemic and afterwards, the people in the 70s, the 80s, they were more or less getting the same grades. But the people in the 40s and 50s suddenly dropped down to about the 20s and 30s.
Really?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about that specifically. One thing I remember from my high school when we were in the pandemic, after senior year was the year we were allowed to go back to classes. And one thing that the teachers noted was that a lot of students who had good grades during the online sessions, once back in class, suddenly were not able to keep up that same level of grade.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Part of it is also, one thing we didn't mention is the prevalence of cheating.
Right.
That it's much easier to cheat online with online classes, and that's definitely part of that.
Yeah.
And it may not be that, and I've seen this in students that I've caught cheating, is that, when I catch them, I'll say, did you use any outside resources? And they'll say, well, I did Google the answers. I'm like, well, that's using outside resources. And they're like, well, it's just Googling. And there seems to be this disconnect between Googling and cheating. That Googling is not cheating. I've had discussions where people have defended it. Arguments with relatives who defended Googling. Why do you have to know something if you could just Google it? It's like, but I'm not saying that everyone is it, but I think, like I said, I think for people who are going to struggle, especially in sciences, that's my experience, my field, that if you're going to struggle, it's much better to do it in person. That you'll get much more attention. Like I said, there's always some faction of the students who are going to do well no matter what you throw at them. They're highly motivated, they're very responsible, they're mature, and these are the students that are going to do well. And I've seen students come through community college and continue on to the Ivy Leagues. Does that say everyone in community college is going to the Ivy Leagues? No. But these students are using this as a springboard and they're doing incredibly well. But others are struggling just to get into a four-year college.
Yeah. So, on a related note of technology, I want to ask how it's impacted the way you share geological findings and new research, and how that changes your class agenda.
That's a big question to unfold, and technology is always changing, and we appear to have periods where we had these revolutions, like the dawn where computers suddenly became prevalent in the classroom and accessible to students. Probably in the late 80s, early 90s was when the computers really started having an influence on the field. And then, we saw, probably the next one was during the pandemic and the rise of online teaching. That prior to the pandemic, I was teaching all my classes in person, and my choices each semester were basically what classes I wanted to teach and when. Since the pandemic, during the pandemic, we went completely online, and a lot of the old guard faculty, a lot of them retired early, just they didn't want to deal with it. But after the pandemic, even after we came back, now, I could teach classes fully in person if they go. I could teach classes completely asynchronous online, where I never have any contact with the students. It's just deadlines, readings, and correcting homeworks, and we all communicate by email and through the computer. I don't think that's the greatest way to teach, but some people like that. Some people do well like that. And then you get the in-between ones of different flavors. You have high flex courses where some students decide to come in and some students decide to stay home and attend remotely. Those are very complicated to teach, especially lab science. And then you have hybrid courses, which is some combination of in-person and online. And you can either have mostly in person and a little bit online, which is a hybrid class, or you can have mostly online and a little bit in person, which is considered an online class with a little bit of a hybrid. And there's colors and variations between all of those. And each of them come with pluses and minuses. You know, that's how technology is changing right now. The next big change is going to be AI. And we're starting to see the influence of that now. And I don't think, obviously, we're still at the beginning stages of it, trying to figure out how and if to incorporate it into classrooms rather than, you know, other than the fact that it helps people cheat.
Right.
And I've seen examples of people using AI to cheat. And it's too bad, because this is the bad side to AI, where, you know, somebody gives a beautiful answer on an essay question, and then when I call them on it and ask them to explain it, they couldn't even tell me anything about it. Which, you know, what is that going to get you? We're going to train a bunch of people who can get jobs but can't innovate. And, you know, it frustrates me, and ultimately in the long run it's going to cripple students, whether they realize it or not.
Do you think that the solution to that, or would you say that it's better to remove AI from education, or find a way to integrate it and incorporate it?
Or something in between. I don't think you remove it. Removing it isn't going to make people sort of ready for the real world. I think you know, it was sort of like releasing the genie out of the bottle. Until we can figure out all of the applications of AI, and especially those applications that we really want to pursue, we really don't know, you know, the full extent and what we need to teach people about AI. It can be learned. It can be a learning tool, and I've seen some applications of AI which appear to be, you know, great learning tools, where, you know, you can feed textbooks and recorded lectures and handwritten notes into an AI, and they will spit out, you know, an outline and flashcards and, you know, hints of what's the most relevant material in there. Is that helpful? Yeah, I think if people are going to use it, but, you know, like any tool, it's easy to play with, but be careful how you use it. No, don't remove it, but we have to go through a period of constant monitoring right now before you figure out how to incorporate it. You know, are we just going to, you know, have a free-for-all and assign essays that students write by AI? You know, it doesn't do anything for the students, and it just creates more work for me that is going to be useless. So no, that's not the best utilization. But yeah, we need to, over the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years probably, we'll figure out where it's going to fall and how it's going to impact. Clearly, I mean, there's some fields that are going to be probably eliminated because of AI. Others that are going to be severely impacted. Others that may not be touched at all. So, you know, computer programmers, I wouldn't recommend people going into computer programming right now.
No, it's not looking good.
No, it's not looking good. You know, things like legal, paralegals may not be necessary in the future. Although, you know, I have a lot of friends who are lawyers who say they make a lot of mistakes. I'm sort of surprised right now. I haven't seen where AI is going to impact teaching, negatively at least. That I think there's always going to be need for teaching. You know, even in the future, where, you know, a lot of people could obtain their knowledge through AI or through the internet. You know, people always like, oh, with all this information available, we don't need teacher. People can just teach themselves.
But then it's an overload of information. You can't.
You know what? You know,
guide yourself through.
We don't have new information. The information's always been out there.
Right.
You know, ever since, you know, Socrates, the information's been out there.
Yeah.
You know, does that mean that we don't need teachers since Socrates? No, you just got to go to the library. It's like, yeah, that's not what people do. They hire the teachers.
Yeah.
So, no, just because the internet is out there doesn't mean we're going to abolish the need for teachers.
Right. Okay. Now I want to get into some more divisive questions, I guess. I want to ask you, in your view, how has the new administration his approach to science and research funding affected the field of geology, particularly in terms of government funding and grants?
To the extent that I understand what the administration is doing, we'll sort of couch it on those terms, which I don't. And I'm constantly trying to figure out what's going on. It appears that they're making very random and haphazard cuts to a lot of fields. Some of them aren't as haphazard. Some see more direct, and perhaps some of the cuts aren't based on sound scientific reasoning.
Right.
Put it that way. How is it impacting the field? Geology, like any other field that relies on funding, this is where the next generation of scientists is coming from. And as best I can tell, I don't have any graduate students. I'm not training students here at community college. I train undergraduates who then go on. But I think we are sort of cutting off at the ankles a lot of the future scientists. This has always been an undercurrent in our society of people who don't understand the science, don't trust it often, and that can often be related to not trusting the individuals who are doing the science. Sort of an anti-intellectual feeling. And that's not new.
Do you see that? Do you feel that it's been rising lately?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's been encouraged in some corners of society. Yes. And I'm constantly trying to figure out why that is. I think anytime you have sort of these revolutions in society, be it a scientific revolution, a cultural revolution, or a financial revolution, whatever it is, you're always going to leave some people behind. And to a certain extent, I think that the people who are being left behind in this present series of revolutions, some of it technological, some of it cultural, that they, rather than that they are the ones who are driving a lot of this. And I don't think it's helping them. And I think acknowledging that they're being left behind is the first step to solving this. And I don't think we've been adequately, to the extent that you can control the revolutions. AI was released on us. Are we in control of AI? Not at all right now. Computers, cultural, and I think a lot of people are feeling an onslaught right now. Does that mean we need to go backwards? Probably not the best decision. I think we need to figure out how to bring up everyone with the revolution. Maybe we can do that more adequately.
And I want to ask you about the future of academic research in geology. Where do you see it going? What coming revelations do you see?
There's always plenty more to learn. It's hard. If I could predict where it's going, I would be wealthy and I would be very famous. But I'm not. I'm neither.
Still time?
No, time's running out. Time and interest is running out to get famous and rich. But where is it going? There's always. I grew up in a sort of somewhat religious, non-scientific background. And the one thing that science offered to me that my previous existence wasn't is that it created a bigger world. It answered some of the questions that were nagging me. but it also created more questions, much more profound and bigger questions. And those questions have not been answered in my life, and they're still lingering out there. You know, questions as to, you know, how big is the universe? What is the fate of the universe? Does evolution have direction, or is it completely random? You know, how do we rationalize our intelligence with biological evolution? And are humans, you know, different from everything else on the planet, or are we just some sort of, you know, spectrum of possibilities? What is our place in all this? You know, the questions just, the more you ask, the bigger the questions get. And, you know, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm getting to ask better questions. I'm not sure I'm coming up with definitive answers, but the questions are getting better through time.
Okay. I want to ask you finally, what advice would you give to any students who might be interested in pursuing research in geology and in navigating the landscape of academic research?
It's pretty simple. Get good grades, and shoot higher than you think you can attain. That they're really, at this level that I'm teaching, it really comes down to good grades and participation. You know, I've seen students, I had one student who took 3 classes from me, aced all 3 classes, and then came for me for recommendations. And I said, of course, you know, of course you have A's in all my classes. Of course I'm going to give you recommendations. But they gave me the names of 8 colleges that they were applying to. They included things like colleges like Columbia, Wellesley, Georgetown, Sarah Lawrence. All of these are top-tier colleges. You know, I jokingly, I said to them, you know, what's your fallback? You know, these are all pretty high, but they were pretty self-confident. I gave them very good recommendations, and they ended up getting into all of them. Which, you know, I see people at community college sort of taking it as a joke, sort of an easy extension on from high school. And it can be if that's what you make of it. But if you set your aims a little bit higher, I think you'd be surprised. And out of the times where I've seen it in students that they come in and it's like, hey, I'm thinking about applying to this college, and I'm like, you know, you can do better. You know, there's financial reasons, there's family reasons, maybe they don't want to leave the area. I go, but I generally, if I see it in them, I'll encourage them, shoot higher. I can't afford that college. Let the college work. And that's not your concern. You know what? If you can't afford it, you can always say no. But let the college tell you. And most of the times where I've recommended it, students have gotten into the colleges. Sometimes they've gone there, sometimes they haven't for various reasons.
I have to ask you for a recommendation.
Right. But like I said, it's grades, and it's maturity, and it's shooting higher than you think you can do.
So, to sum it up, could we say believe in yourself and shoot for the moon?
Believe in yourself and accomplish.
Right. Okay.
Belief only goes so far. You gotta have the accomplishments on paper. And if you have belief in yourself and accomplishments, you can go far.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks so much, Professor.
Sure.
I'm really grateful for you sitting down and taking this interview. Hopefully, it takes too much of your time.
No, not much.
You
caught me at a good time. Mondays are a good free time.
Perfect. And this is a really great interview. Very insightful.
I hope so.
I think my communications professor is going to like it a lot. Also, I was wondering if actually you could send her an email letting her know that I came by and did this.
Why don't you have her have her request from me, and I'll respond to her.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be better.
Okay.
I have no idea who she is.
No problem. Okay.
So, but yeah, what's her name?
Professor Aquila. Aquila?
Aquila?
Yeah.
How do you spell that?
AQUI.
LA. Okay, if I see something from her, I will respond and tell her that you did sit with me on this.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Do
Professor.
you need my card?
Sure.
Yeah, it does have my email on there, so you can give that to me.
This was one of